Being so Jujutsu Kaisen is on break this week, I think we have time to theorize what might happen in the coming chapter. So with the fight in general coming into its final stages, the winning conditions for both sides seem to be pretty clear. If Sukuna can survive until Mahoraga adapts to Infinity, Gojo is all but going to lose. This is simply because Gojo relies so heavily on his Limitless. I do believe that without Limitless, Gojo is definitely a top 10 sorcerer, but there is absolutely no chance that unless Gojo pulls out something wild that he's going to beat Sukuna. Even he doesn't seem that sure that he could beat Sukuna after Mahoraga adapts to Limitless, as he states that all he needs to do is beat Sukuna before his timer runs out, rather than stating that he can still win without it. So why is Gojo so weak without Limitless? It comes down to what Gojo relies on for his attack and his defense. So Gojo has the ultimate defense where he uses Limitless neutral between him and the object trying to come into contact with him. He does this by halving the distance between him and the object every time it reaches that half distance. This means the distance between him and that object will become exponentially smaller and they can never actually touch Gojo. The only way to counter this ability would be using a simple domain, but if the user does that, then they can't simultaneously use their curse technique. This means Sukuna was limited to using either a simple domain or make it so Gojo can't actually use his curse technique, like he did in their domain battle. So without Infinity, Gojo has no defense. On the offensive side of the spectrum, Gojo also stands no chance at dealing significant damage to Sukuna without Limitless. Hollow Purple as well as Cursed Energy Manipulation Red and Blue all derive from Limitless. Think about it this way, the only way Gojo has dealt significant damage to Sukuna is from Hollow Purple as well as Red. Sukuna even managed to tank a 200% amped version of Hollow Purple. So without Limitless, we would assume that Gojo has to just use hand-to-hand combat, which he primarily used in chapter 231, but as we saw, no significant damage was ever dealt to Sukuna. So it's clear that without Limitless, Gojo would get destroyed by Sukuna. The only option for Gojo to win would be to kill Sukuna before this timer runs out. So my theory on the next chapter is we will likely see Mahoraga's will spin a few more times, maybe get to like the last click, and Gojo to unleash his secret technique. This will be a last ditch technique that probably won't actually finish off Sukuna, but it'll probably deal a lot of damage. I think it will likely be a matter of Gojo unleashes this technique and then Sukuna obviously tanks it somehow, it'll be something crazy, and then Sukuna's wheel adapts and then Gojo has this big speech and all that kind of stuff, but that'll be in like a future chapter. In chapter 232, we'll get a lot of combat that kind of like pushes the idea that Gojo has a secret technique which he will unleash and then he'll lose. So I think the fight will end in probably like the next 3 to 4 chapters, maybe less, but I'd say 3 to 4 chapters is a safe bet. But I've done a video discussing Gojo's new technique, so once you're done with this video, go check that out. But essentially, all of the theories I came up with probably wouldn't be enough to kill Sukuna. However, let's say Gojo used a neutral application of Limitless, Cursed Energy Manipulation White. He would do this in order to illuminate the entire area around him, meaning there is no shadow for Sukuna to summon Shikigami. Now I remember saying in the video that I did that Sukuna would lose the ability to adapt to Gojo's techniques, but being so he's already summoned the Shikigami from the shadows, I don't think that Shikigami relies on the shadow to stay there, so he'd likely still have to wheel out, which is still a problem for Gojo. Another problem is that Gojo wouldn't be able to use Limitless or stack Limitless while he's doing this. So that means he wouldn't be able to use Infinity or Hollow Purple or anything like that. So it's likely that Gojo will attempt this new strategy, Sukuna will be like confused and all that kind of stuff, and then he'll realise that Gojo probably can't use Infinity at the same time, and he'll probably abuse that using like Cleave and Dismantle. And if he was to use Cleave and Dismantle and deal even more damage to Gojo, it'd force him to use Reverse Curse technique, and it could be a way to whittle Gojo down, and that would make sense as to how he ends up losing. Because I am fully convinced that Gojo is going to lose this battle, and I'll get onto why slightly later in the video. I doubt Gojo would lose due to Reverse Curse technique, but sustaining more damage to the brain is definitely going to lower his odds of winning this fight. So I want to quickly discuss why I think that Gojo has to lose this fight. So I was talking to my friends about some of these theories that I had, and they made the point that Gege doesn't really bring something up earlier in the story without using it later. The reason I say this is because Gege is hinted towards Kashimo vs Sukuna, which is a fight a lot of the Jujutsu fanbase has been waiting for, and it makes sense as to why this fight would happen. So theoretically, the conditions for Kashimo vs Sukuna would be Gojo losing. Also, Gojo as a character seems very complete. He has passed his teachings down to many students, he's led the path for Jujutsu sorcerers, and he's provided the Jujutsu high students with someone to look up to. someone who they can train to surpass, and there isn't much left for Gojo to actually do. I guess there is the idea that Gojo wanted to take over the higher ups and introduce a new system or new era of Jujutsu, but this doesn't mean that he has to be the one to do it. People like Yuta or Hakari are more than capable of achieving Gojo's goal. On top of all of that, seeing their sensei lose in a battle, and with all of his students regarding him as an unbeatable character, it could be a big shock for a lot of the main cast. This means that it could, or it should, make a lot of the Jujutsu sorcerers lose hope. Their main weapon was gone, and now the odds were significantly shifted into Kenjaku's favour. This may lead to someone having to take the role as leader, and we could finally see a role for Yuji. This is because people often gravitate towards him, and he does often take that commanding role. This would allow Yuji to transition from being the cog in the machine to being the machine itself. As well as this, we could see some serious character development from our main cast after they see Gojo dying. It paves the way for some serious potential power-ups, and we may finally see that long-awaited Yuji power-up, which is probably the most anticipated thing in Jujutsu Kaisen besides Yuta, Maki and Hakari versus Kenjaku. Another problem with Gojo winning this battle is the most probable case scenario would be that if Gojo killed Sukuna, he would literally just go on and kill Kenjaku and the rest of the villains in the story. Now Kenjaku is no pushover, but let's be totally honest, even a weakened and exhausted Gojo would probably beat Kenjaku. This fight would be amazing, but I would much prefer to see the rest of the cast have their fights. The Culling Games allowed for some serious character development, which I know I've said a lot, but it's something that we see so much in shonen manga, and Jujutsu Kaisen is no exception. But if Gojo goes to destroy everyone, then we likely wouldn't get to see the showcase of all these characters' new power-ups, and their development would definitely feel wasted. But I know that was a lot, so let's get back onto what I think is going to happen. So ideally we will get a lot more hand-to-hand combat, and I don't want to see as much of the Jujutsu sorcerers, as I feel like we have engaged with them a lot, and their only purpose seems to be to explain a new technique used in the fight. But as the fight is mainly turned into a brawl, as both fighters have burnt through their cursed energy, they can't rely nearly as much on complex techniques. So that means we won't need to cut back to the Jujutsu sorcerers as much, meaning that we get a lot more action in the coming chapters. The most likely situation is that Gojo will showcase some new power, and that's where Gege leaves the chapter, on a cliffhanger which he obviously loves to do. Obviously the cliffhanger will be, oh, what does the power up do? This obviously leads to some great theories and anticipation, and the oncoming chapters will be phenomenal. The reason that Gojo will be the one to get a power up is Sukuna doesn't need a new power up, he just needs to survive. So we've seen a shift in the balance of the fight. Sukuna has come from being the challenger to Gojo now having to take his place. Gojo needs to bring the fight to Sukuna, as Sukuna is not required to do anything at the moment. I like how this is shifted, and Gege is definitely showing that Gojo isn't this unbeatable force, and it creates a path for many people to be able to surpass him. And us as a fan base would like to see some opposition to Gojo, and Gege is definitely providing. The fight is almost certainly not going to end by the end of this chapter, but instead of just Gojo showing the new power, perhaps both of them will reveal a new power simultaneously. As a fanbase, there has been a lot of speculation that Sukuna has a bank of cursed techniques, and throughout the fight he hasn't shown much of this at all. We are just waiting for the line open black box, and we know it is time. A battle between both their last ditch attacks could be a cool way to finish off the fight. I think Gege even put in the manga that this fight has rounds to it. It seems as though round 1, being the domain battle, is long gone, and we've transitioned to round 2, which is just a brawl, and in the closing round 3 could be the decisive round if we're talking in terms of a fight or a boxing match. This would be where both Sukuna and Gojo throw all of their might into a final attack, kind of like the Final Valley in Naruto. Obviously this is a different series, but it could be like that kind of style, and Sukuna will probably end up victorious. But also, if Sukuna doesn't use the black box here, then it is likely that he'll use it against Kashimo or Yuji. It is set up that his next opponents will likely be them two, so it makes sense for it to be used then, rather than now. As Sukuna's techniques probably wouldn't be able to breach Gojo's infinity, hence why he hasn't shown it yet. But that is all for my chapter 232 predictions. Feel free to leave your own predictions down below, and I'll make sure to read them all, and maybe feature them in a future video. If you did enjoy this video, then make sure to like, and if you are enjoying my content at the moment, then smash that subscribe button, as it means a lot to me, as well as helping this channel grow. Also leave your feedback in the comments, and I'll make sure to improve in any way suggested, as I want to ensure that the content I produce is the best quality possible. But with that all said, I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.